Chris and Mia had been together for almost 4 years. For Mia, Chris wasn't just her boyfriend. He was her best friend, her safe place, and the person she could always turn to whenever life became difficult. They had first met on a rainy evening outside a small coffee shop when Mia accidentally dropped her books. Chris had helped her pick them up, and what began as a simple moment slowly turned into something neither of them expected. They started talking, then texting late into the night, and eventually, those conversations became a relationship filled with love, laughter, and countless memories. Over the years, Chris and Mia became inseparable. Chris knew Mia's favorite songs, the way she took her coffee, and the little things that could instantly make her smile. Mia knew when Chris was pretending to be okay, and could tell from his voice when something was bothering him. They had their own little tradition too. Every night before going to sleep, one of them would send the same message. "Good night. I'm still here." It was a simple sentence, but to them, it meant everything. No matter how busy or difficult their day had been, they always made time for those words. For 4 years, they believed nothing could separate them. Then, Chris got a new job in another city. At first, neither of them was worried. Chris promised Mia that the distance wouldn't change their relationship. He told her he would call every night. And Mia smiled and promised that she would always wait for his calls. During the first few weeks, everything seemed fine. They talked about their days, laughed about silly things, and continued making plans for their future. Sometimes Chris would even fall asleep while they were still talking on the phone. But slowly, things began to change. Chris started coming home late, his calls became shorter, and the long conversations they once had turned into quick conversations that lasted only a few minutes. Then, even those calls became less frequent. Mia noticed every little change, but she didn't want to pressure him. Whenever Chris told her he was tired, she simply said, "Okay, get some rest," even when what she really wanted was for him to stay and talk to her. One Friday night, Mia waited for Chris to call. 8 o'clock passed, then 9, then 10. She kept checking her phone, hoping to see his name appear on the screen. Finally, at 11:47 p.m., her phone rang. It was Chris. Mia answered immediately, but the moment she heard his voice, something felt different. He didn't sound tired or busy, he sounded distant. Mia quietly asked him if everything was okay, but Chris didn't answer right away. There was a long silence before he finally said, "Mia, we need to talk." Her heart immediately sank. She knew those words were never a good sign. She asked him what had happened, but Chris struggled to find the right words. Finally, he took a deep breath and said, "I think we should break up." Mia froze. For a few seconds, she couldn't even understand what she had just heard. She asked him why, and Chris told her that he didn't think things were the same anymore. Mia's voice began to shake as she reminded him that they had been happy and that everything had seemed fine. But Chris could only say, "I don't know." Then Mia asked the question she had been afraid to ask. "Do you still love me?" There was silence on the other end of the phone. Mia waited for his answer, but the silence continued. Finally, Chris whispered, "I don't know." Those 3 words broke her heart more than anything else could have. She had spent 4 years loving him, trusting him, and believing that their future was certain. And now he couldn't even tell her whether he still loved her. Mia wiped away her tears and quietly said, "Okay." There was no screaming, no anger, and no dramatic goodbye. Their 4-year relationship ended in less than 10 minutes, with 2 people sitting miles apart and neither knowing how to stop what was happening. Before the call ended, Mia asked one final question. Was I really that easy to leave? Chris didn't answer. A few seconds later, the call ended. Mia stared at her phone in silence. For 4 years, she had fallen asleep after receiving Chris's message saying, "Good night, I'm still here." But that night, there was nothing. No message. No call. Nothing She placed her phone beside her, looked at the empty screen, and whispered through her tears, "Maybe he isn't anymore." But Mia didn't know the truth. Chris hadn't stopped loving her. In fact, there was something he had been hiding from her for weeks. And 3 months later, Mia would discover a secret that would make her question everything she thought she knew about their breakup. 3 months had passed since Chris and Mia broke up. But for Mia, those 3 months felt like an entire year. She had tried everything to move on. She deleted their pictures from her phone, packed his gifts into a box, and stopped listening to the songs they used to play together. She even changed her daily routine so she wouldn't accidentally pass the places where they had made their happiest memories. But no matter how hard she tried, Chris was still everywhere in old photographs, familiar songs, quiet evenings, and especially in the silence before she went to sleep. At first, Mia kept expecting Chris to come back. Every time her phone vibrated, her heart would jump, hoping it was his name on the screen. But day after day, there was nothing. Eventually, she stopped checking. She began accepting the painful idea that maybe Chris really had moved on. She told herself that if he could leave after 4 years, then perhaps she had been the only one holding on to their relationship. One rainy evening, Mia was cleaning her old laptop when she came across a folder she hadn't opened in months. The folder was simply named Memories. She almost deleted it, but something stopped her. She opened it, and suddenly years of her life appeared on the screen. There were pictures of their first date, their first Christmas together, late-night road trips, birthdays, and countless ordinary moments that had somehow become precious memories. Mia smiled through her sadness as she looked at them. Then, she noticed a video she had never seen before. She clicked on it, and Chris appeared on the screen. He was sitting in their old apartment, smiling directly at the camera. Mia immediately recognized the room. It was the same place where they had spent countless evenings together. Chris looked nervous at first, then laughed and said, "If you're watching this someday, I hope we're still together." Mia's smile slowly disappeared. Chris continued talking about their future, saying that he didn't know where life would take them, but he hoped they would someday get married, have a family, and grow old together. Then his expression became serious. He looked into the camera and said, "Mia, if somehow you're watching this years from now, I want you to know something. You were the best thing that ever happened to me." Mia's eyes filled with tears. She paused the video for a moment, trying to understand why Chris had recorded something like this. Then, she noticed another file in the same folder. It had been created on the exact day they broke up. Her hands began to shake as she opened it. It wasn't a photograph or a video. It was a letter. At the top, Chris had written one sentence, "The truth, I couldn't tell you." Mia began reading. Chris explained that the new job in another city wasn't the only reason he had moved away. He had actually been offered an opportunity to work overseas, an opportunity that could completely change his future. But there was a problem. The company expected him to leave almost immediately, and Chris knew Mia had her own responsibilities, her family, and her dreams. He was afraid that asking her to leave everything behind for him would eventually make her resent him. So, he made a terrible decision. He decided to make Mia believe that he no longer loved her. He wrote that he thought if Mia hated him, she would eventually move on. He thought being the villain in her story would be easier than watching her sacrifice her life for him. Mia couldn't stop crying. She read the final lines again and again. Chris had written that he still loved her. He had never stopped loving her. He simply believed that walking away was the only way he could protect her from a future she might regret. Mia closed the laptop and sat completely still. For 3 months, she had believed Chris had stopped loving her. For 3 months, she had blamed herself. And now, she discovered that he had been suffering too. But there was something Chris didn't know. A few weeks before their breakup, Mia had also received an incredible job offer. It was from a company in the same country where Chris had moved. She had never told him about it because she had been waiting for the right moment. She had planned to surprise him and tell him that she was willing to take the chance with him. But their breakup happened before she ever got the opportunity. Mia looked at the date on Chris's letter. It had been written exactly 3 months ago. Her heart began beating faster. For the first time since the breakup, she picked up her phone and opened Chris's contact. His number was still saved. She stared at it for several minutes. Then she typed a message. "You should have told me the truth." Her finger hovered over the send button. She almost deleted it. But then she remembered everything they had promised each other. So she added one more sentence. "Because I would have followed you." Mia pressed send. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the message changed. Delivered. Mia's heart stopped. She stared at the screen. 1 minute passed. Then another. Suddenly, her phone began ringing. The name on the screen was the one she had spent 3 months trying to forget. Chris. Mia's hands trembled as she answered the call. Neither of them spoke. They simply listened to each other breathe. And then Chris finally whispered, "Mia." His voice broke. "I thought you hated me." Mia closed her eyes as tears rolled down her cheeks. "I tried to." There was silence. Then Chris asked the question that had been haunting both of them for 3 months. "Is it too late?" Mia didn't answer, because she knew that sometimes love can survive distance, heartbreak, and even silence. But rebuilding trust after someone deliberately breaks your heart is a completely different battle. And Mia wasn't sure if she was ready to forgive him. For a few seconds, neither Chris nor Mia said anything. They had spent 3 months imagining what it would feel like to hear each other's voices again. But now that the moment had finally arrived, neither of them knew what to say. Mia could hear Chris breathing heavily through the phone, and somehow that familiar sound brought back every memory she had tried so hard to forget. Finally, Chris whispered, "Mia, I'm sorry." Mia closed her eyes. Those 2 words were something she had wanted to hear for months. But now that she had heard them, they didn't magically erase the pain. She told him that she understood why he had been afraid, but she couldn't understand why he had chosen to break her heart instead of trusting her with the truth. Chris admitted that he had been scared. He thought Mia would sacrifice everything for him, and he couldn't live with the possibility of becoming the reason she regretted her choices someday. Mia quietly replied, "You didn't give me a choice, Chris. You made the choice for both of us." Chris had no answer. She was right. For 3 months, he had convinced himself that leaving her was an act of love. But now he realized that love wasn't about deciding what was best for someone without asking them. Love was about trusting someone enough to let them make their own decisions. Mia told him about the job offer she had received. Chris was shocked. He couldn't believe that she had actually been given an opportunity in the same country where he was living. He asked why she had never told him, and Mia gave a sad laugh. "Because I wanted to tell you in person. I wanted it to be a surprise." Chris became silent again. The irony of it all was almost unbearable. They had both been keeping secrets because they thought they were protecting each other. Chris had pushed Mia away because he thought she would sacrifice too much for him, while Mia had kept her opportunity secret because she wanted to surprise him. If they had simply talked to each other, none of this might have happened. Chris asked Mia if she still loved him. This time, she didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered, "but loving you doesn't mean I can forget what happened." Chris understood. He didn't ask her to come back immediately. He didn't ask her to forgive him. Instead, he told her that he would spend as much time as it took proving that he could be honest with her again. Over the next few weeks, they started talking regularly. At first, their conversations were awkward. They didn't know whether to call each other friends, exes, or something else. But slowly, They began talking about the things they had missed during those 3 months. Chris told her about his new life overseas, and Mia told him about everything that had happened while he was gone. They laughed again. They argued sometimes. They talked about the breakup, and most importantly, they stopped hiding things from each other. One evening, Chris asked Mia to look outside her window. She walked toward it and saw a car parked across the street. Chris stepped out. Mia froze. He had traveled all the way back just to see her. When she opened the door, they stood face to face for several seconds without saying anything. Chris looked nervous, almost like the first time they had met. Then he said, "I know I don't deserve another chance." Mia looked at him. "But I want to earn one." Mia's eyes filled with tears. She didn't immediately hug him. Instead, she asked, "What happens if you're scared again?" Chris took a deep breath. "Then I'll tell you I'm scared. What happens if things get difficult? We talk about them. And what happens if you think leaving is better for me?" Chris smiled sadly. "Then I'll trust you enough to let you decide." That was the answer Mia had been waiting for. She stepped forward and hugged him. Chris held her tightly, and for the first time in months, neither of them felt like they were losing each other. But their story didn't magically become perfect after that day. They knew love wasn't enough by itself. They had to rebuild what had been broken. So they started again. Not as the same Chris and Mia who had fallen in love 4 years earlier, but as two people who had learned something painful about love, trust, and communication. A year later, Mia moved overseas. She and Chris found a small apartment near the ocean. It wasn't the dream life they had once imagined, but it was theirs. One night, they sat together on the balcony watching the city lights. Mia smiled and asked, "Do you remember our old tradition?" Chris looked at her. "How could I forget?" He took her hand. Then he whispered the words they had once exchanged every night. "Good night. I'm still here." Mia smiled through her tears. "Me too." Sometimes people think a breakup means the love is over, but sometimes a breakup is simply the moment when two people realize that love without honesty isn't enough. Chris and Mia didn't get a perfect love story. They got something more real. They lost each other. They hurt each other. They almost became strangers. But when they finally found their way back, they understood that the strongest relationships aren't built on never falling apart. They're built on choosing each other again after everything has fallen apart. And that night, as Mia rested her head on Chris's shoulder, she realized something she had once been too heartbroken to understand. Sometimes the person who breaks your heart isn't trying to leave you. Sometimes they're simply afraid that they're not enough to stay. And sometimes, all love needs is the courage to tell the truth.